Nancy Mace tried to humiliate Jasmine Crockett with "You people." Her line response silenced Congress. Nancy Mace opened her mouth, and in 5 words she tore the air from the room. "You people are always causing trouble." For a heartbeat, Congress itself froze. Not a shuffle, not a cough, not a whisper. Only the low mechanical hum of the cameras catching every flicker of shock on faces that, until that instant, believed they were still safe inside the performance. Nancy Mace didn't flinch. She didn't stutter. She delivered the phrase with the casual arrogance of someone too accustomed to speaking without consequence. A polished smile, a crisp white blazer, a soundbite designed for primetime outrage. But she miscalculated something fundamental. She didn't realize who she had said it to. Across the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett straightened her spine, not dramatically, not angrily, just enough. Like a fault line, shifting deep under the earth, invisible at first, but enough to make the ground above tremble before it cracks. There was no gasping outrage from Crockett, no firestorm of shouting, only a stillness so sharp it felt like a blade. Her pen stopped moving, her eyes lifted, and the entire hearing chamber, the polished marble, the echoing grandeur, the history-soaked walls, they all seemed to lean in breathless. "Excuse me," Crockett said, voice low and dangerously even. "Did you just say, 'You people'?" It wasn't a question. It was a mirror held up to the nation. In that suspended moment, America saw itself, not the sanitized version sung about at parades or printed in textbooks, but the version that slipped out when power got too comfortable. Nancy Mace smiled again, shrugged, doubled down. "That's right. You people are always causing trouble." Somewhere far off, a congressional aide dropped a pen. A chair creaked. A staffer inhaled sharply through clenched teeth. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She didn't shout. She didn't pound the table. She didn't storm out for the cameras. She dismantled Mace's world one calm, devastating breath at a time. Because when a congresswoman says, "You people," on national television, there are no more gray areas. No polite denials. No hiding behind context or nuance. There is only the naked truth. Who gets to be "we" in America and who doesn't? And what happens when the people left out of "we" finally refuse to play along? The House Oversight hearing that day was supposed to be another procedural clash, a debate over federal education budgets dressed up in partisan talking points and electoral posturing. But under the high vaulted ceilings behind the gleaming microphones, something far older had crept into the room, the unfinished business of American history. They called it a budget debate. It was a battle for the soul of the country. And in that battle, Nancy Mace, the polished darling of the conservative right, made a fatal mistake. She spoke from a place she thought was invisible, a place built on the assumption that certain words, certain sneers, certain judgments would simply pass unnoticed or worse accepted as normal. But Jasmine Crockett was not normal. She was a breach in the script. And the second Mace said, "You people," the carefully staged theater cracked open, spilling raw, electric, irreversible truth onto the floor. America, watching at home, half distracted, at first scrolling phones, sipping coffee, sat up straight without realizing why. Something ancient had just been summoned. Something that demanded attention. Crockett didn't reach for anger. She reached for history. Her stillness was not silence. It was pressure. It was memory. The kind that doesn't fade, but burrows deeper each time a door is locked, as you walk past, each time your resume is tossed for a name too hard to pronounce, each time a cop's hand rests too easily on a holster during a traffic stop. It was the memory of being called "you people," always off mic, off camera, behind closed doors, and being expected to smile through it. Not today. Not here. Not while 22 million Americans were watching live. Across cable networks and live streams, the clip replayed instantly, the phrase "you people" echoing like a gunshot in a canyon. Social feeds exploded not because someone had been caught swearing or fumbling, but because someone had finally said the quiet part out loud. And Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Because sometimes the greatest weapon isn't outrage, it's survival. It's standing tall in a room that has spent centuries trying to erase you and daring it to blink first. As Crockett leaned back slightly in her chair, arms folded neatly, eyes locked on Mace, the room seemed to contract around her. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every "you people" ever whispered across a conference table. Every "you people" muttered during a traffic stop. Every "you people" scrawled in housing applications tucked between resume lines, slipped into rejection letters carved into sentencing reports. Jasmine Crockett wasn't answering Nancy Mace. She was answering history. And this time, history had a microphone. In the seconds that followed, nobody moved. Nobody dared. Even the gavel at the head of the committee remained suspended, midair, forgotten in the chairwoman's hand. The oxygen hadn't just left the room. It had been replaced with something heavier. Recognition. For the first time in that chamber, perhaps, for the first time in many of their lives, some members of Congress, some aides, some viewers at home realized the privilege they had always worn like invisible armor. The privilege of not hearing "you people" directed at them. The privilege of never wondering if "we the people" meant them. And now they couldn't unhear it. They couldn't unsay it. They couldn't pretend it hadn't happened, not when 22 million eyes were locked onto that one instant. Not when the wound was already open. Not when the world was already watching. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't raise a finger. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. She simply began to speak, steady, surgical, unflinching. And in doing so, she didn't just dismantle Nancy Mace. She dismantled the illusion that America could keep pretending. The story had changed, and there was no going back. What had been billed as a dry congressional budget hearing had now become a battleground, not just for numbers, but for memory. For who gets to define America, and who gets erased when the definition no longer fits. It was supposed to be another performance, pre-written speeches, political theater, a few angry sound bites for evening news shows. The kind of event that most Americans would never even know had happened. But the second Nancy Mace let slip the words that history had spent decades trying to bury, the stage collapsed under its own hypocrisy. And, standing at the center of the wreckage, was Jasmine Crockett, unblinking, unshaken, and suddenly holding the kind of power that can't be spun, can't be polished, can't be contained. The hearing chamber itself seemed to feel the shift. The lights too bright moments ago now cast sharp, unflattering shadows across faces that had practiced smugness all morning. Staffers fumbled papers with sweaty fingers. Some committee members, the ones who had nodded along with Mace's opening tirade, now avoided looking at Crockett altogether. Because it was no longer about budgets or bills. It was about a reckoning. And reckoning has a smell to it. Like static before a storm, like the air thickening before a tornado touches down. Everyone in that room could feel it. Jasmine didn't rush to speak. She didn't chase the momentum. She let the weight of what had been said linger heavy and accusing until even the leather chairs seemed to creak under the pressure. She adjusted the microphone with a soft, deliberate motion, a motion that said, "I'm not here to perform. I'm here to remind you." And then she began, not with fury, not with fire, but with a single question that sliced cleaner than any outrage: who gets forgiven in America? The question didn't hang in the air. It detonated, because everyone knew the answer. They just weren't used to saying it out loud. Nancy Mace tried to hide the twitch in her jaw, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders. Across the aisle, a Republican staffer scribbled furiously in a notebook trying to pivot the narrative before it slipped too far out of control. But there was no pivoting now. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice steady as steel warmed by memory. Privilege isn't the absence of hardship. It's the guarantee that your hardship won't define you forever. She wasn't speaking only to Mace. She was speaking to the room, to the country, to every small-town diner and suburban living room, tuned in because they heard something real was happening on Capitol Hill for once. Crockett reached for the slim folder in front of her, no grand stack of papers, no theatrical evidence dump. Just a few pages handled with the care of sacred artifacts. She placed the first sheet on the table facing the cameras. A mugshot. A 12-year-old black boy from Florida. Handcuffed. Crying. Holding a neon green water gun. Next to it, another photo. A 14-year-old white boy from Missouri. Smirking slightly. No cuffs, no charges. After bringing a real handgun onto school property. Jasmine didn't need to explain the photos. The contrast screamed loud enough. Same country, she said, voice low, unwavering. Different consequences. Across the committee, some eyes dropped to phones, to papers, to anywhere but the images in front of them. Because what Crockett had just placed on the table wasn't evidence in the traditional sense. It was an indictment of the American soul. And indictments like that don't just go away because you refuse to look at them. Nancy Mace shifted in her seat, the artificial brightness of her posture fading inch by inch. Her handlers, whoever had prepped her with talking points about colorblind meritocracy and critical race theory poisoning kids, weren't in the room now. They couldn't save her. She had stepped onto a battlefield armed with slogans. Jasmine Crockett had brought memory facts and a century's worth of unpaid debt. And she was just getting started. The second page slid onto the table. 2 resumes side by side. Identical degrees, identical GPAs, identical internships. One named Josh Miller, the other Deshaun Williams. Jasmine paused not for drama, but for precision, for reverence. Josh gets a callback rate of 46%, she said. Deshaun 14. No dramatics, no finger pointing, just numbers. Cold, irrefutable, merciless. The kind of numbers that no amount of bootstraps mythologizing could explain away. In the viewing galleries above the chamber, a few visitors stiffened. One woman, an older black woman in a Sunday dress, clutched her purse a little tighter. She wasn't shocked. She was remembering. Third page. A real estate appraisal. Jasmine unfolded it like a slow confession. A black family's home appraised at $110,000, she narrated almost gently. Same house, same furniture. After removing family photos and asking a white friend to pose as owner, $160,000. A $50,000 difference, for nothing more and nothing less than the color of the owner's skin. Silence thickened again, not the stunned kind anymore, but the guilty kind. The kind that sweats behind starched collars and pounds inside temples desperate for an excuse that won't come. Mace opened her mouth as if to object, to deflect, to do something, but the chairwoman raised her hand, stopping her cold. Representative Crockett has the floor. And with that, Jasmine delivered the final nail. She didn't shout. She didn't sob. She simply looked into the cameras, into the heart of a watching America, and spoke a sentence that landed heavier than any gavel. Privilege is when you can hear all of this, and still wonder if race had anything to do with it. The line didn't just land. It lodged. Deep. Unignorable. Because somewhere out there in the quiet kitchens and crowded subways, in the break rooms and on the loading docks, Americans were pausing mid-scroll, mid-bite, mid-laugh. Pausing because finally someone had told the truth, without softening it, without apologizing for it, without asking for permission. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just testifying. She was forcing a country built on selective memory to remember itself. And as the cameras kept rolling, as the tension kept rising, as the faces around her either crumbled or calcified, one thing was already certain: the reckoning had begun. And this time, there would be no pretending it hadn't. But reckonings, real ones, don't explode like fireworks. They settle like fog, heavy, creeping into every corner, suffocating the comfort out of a room. And in that hearing chamber, every breath seemed heavier now. Every glance, every shuffle of paper, every nervous adjustment of a tie or a microphone felt like a betrayal. A silent admission that something sacred had just been broken, and none of them knew how to fix it. Across the aisle, Nancy Mace sat rigid, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap, her jaw locked in a smile that had begun to crack at the edges. The careful veneer of political polish, the practiced tone, the curated outrage, the cable news-ready sound bites was failing her. because what Jasmine Crockett had unleashed wasn't a debate. It wasn't a policy disagreement. It was truth. And truth once spoken has a gravity of its own. Mace's allies shifted in their seats, some leaning away from her as if trying to dodge the fallout radiating from her chair. Even the ones who had cheered her earlier attacks on critical race theory were now conspicuously silent, their eyes glued to their phones or the floor. Because in politics, nothing spreads faster than fear. And fear had found them. Not fear of Jasmine Crockett herself. She wasn't raising her voice or pounding her fists. No, it was fear of what she represented. A voice they could no longer shout down. A truth they could no longer ignore. From her seat, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't sneer. She simply remained unmovable, undeniable, the still eye of a moral hurricane that was only gathering force. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into the folder once more. This time, not with documents, not with numbers, but with memory. She unfolded a photograph, old, worn at the corners. It showed a black family mother, father, 2 children standing proudly on the porch of a modest home. Above the photo, in the shaky handwriting of a bureaucrat, the word foreclosed had been stamped. No explanation. No second chances. Crockett laid the photo on the table with the tenderness of someone placing a flower on a grave. This, she said quietly, is what happens when you erase context but keep consequence. A few seats down, a Republican congressman cleared his throat, a dry, nervous sound that echoed far too loudly. But he didn't interrupt. No one dared. Because Jasmine wasn't just presenting evidence anymore. She was presenting ghosts. The ghosts of dreams shuttered by redlining. The ghosts of futures derailed by routine traffic stops. The ghosts of names that never made it into history books because they didn't fit the story America wanted to tell itself. And she wasn't conjuring them with anger. She was conjuring them with remembrance. Across television screens, nationwide millions watched Spellbound. Cable news anchors stumbled over their scripts, unsure whether to treat this like a scandal or something more dangerous, a revelation. Social media feeds flooded with clips, memes, and furious commentary. And everywhere people were asking the same question, did she really just do that? Yes, she did. Without raising her voice, without flinging accusations, without needing to sell herself as a victim or a martyr. She simply placed the truth where everyone could see it and then refused to move aside to make anyone more comfortable. Nancy Mace shifted again, now visibly sweating under the relentless camera glare. Her team out in the hallway, behind glass panels, exchanged frantic texts. Some urging her to apologize, others insisting she double down. Most just praying for a distraction. But no distraction came. There was only Jasmine. And the truth. And the growing, suffocating silence that no spin doctor could undo. Slowly, the chairwoman of the committee leaned forward, not to stop Crockett, not to cut her off, but to give her the floor completely. No time limit, no interruptions, just the kind of heavy sacred permission usually reserved for eulogies and final confessions. And Jasmine took it. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She simply inhaled once, gathering not just breath, but memory, and spoke. The phrase, "you people," has always been a line in the sand. She said, voice steady as bedrock. A way of saying, you are not us. You will never be us. And every time it's spoken, it's not just a slur. It's a reminder that there are doors you were never meant to open. Seats you were never meant to sit in. Futures you were never meant to imagine. A staffer dropped his clipboard. The clatter ricocheted through the room like a gunshot. No one laughed. No one even glanced at him. Because the real impact wasn't in the noise, it was in the stillness. The kind of stillness that falls not when a battle ends, but when the losing side realizes it was defeated long before the first shot was fired. Crockett's words kept coming not like bullets, but like water, slow, steady, relentless. Not tearing walls down, but seeping into every crack, rotting the foundations from within. They say we should forget the past, she said, but forgetting is a privilege too. We don't forget being followed in stores. We don't forget doors slammed in our faces. We don't forget being told with a smile that we were so articulate as if that was a miracle. We don't forget funerals that didn't make the news. We live it. Every day, every step. By now, some committee members were openly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, coughing into closed fists, checking their watches as if willing the clock to move faster. But time wasn't on their side anymore. Jasmine Crockett was. And she wasn't moving until the truth had finished its work. She reached for the last sheet in her folder, a simple government-issued report. DOJ findings on racial disparities in police killings. No activist slogans, no personal anecdotes, just cold statistical reality. Black Americans, she read, are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans, even when unarmed, even when not resisting, even when running away. No commentary, no dramatics, just numbers, just blood, just memory. Mace finally broke a sharp, sputtering objection rising from her chest. That's not fair. But before she could say more, the chairwoman's gavel struck the wood. Order, she said sharply. Representative Crockett has the floor. The gavel's echo rang through the room like a final bell, not signaling victory, but signaling that a new story was being written. Not in slogans, not in sanitized textbooks, but right there live under the unflinching gaze of a nation finally too awake and too angry to look away. Jasmine Crockett gathered her papers. She didn't smile. She didn't smirk. She simply folded the truth back into her folder as if tucking away a weapon she no longer needed to brandish. Because the damage was done. The reckoning was here. And not even the weight of denial could stop it anymore. But what happened next wasn't chaos. It wasn't riots in the street or shouts in the chamber. It was something quieter and far more dangerous. It was the sound of a country realizing in real time that the script they had clung to for so long was crumbling in their hands. As Jasmine Crockett gathered her papers, the hearing room remained suspended in that strange electric stillness, the kind of silence that follows a revelation too heavy to absorb all at once. The gavel tapped again. Procedural voices mumbled about recess, about committee scheduling, but none of it mattered. Because somewhere beyond the thick stone walls of Congress, the world had already begun to move. The clip that one moment when Nancy Mace said, "You people," and Jasmine Crockett answered with lethal calm, detonated across the internet like a depth charge. First came the ripples. A few political journalists, half bored at their desks, posted it to Twitter with snarky captions. Well, that escalated. Nancy Mace just said the quiet part out loud. Then the ripples became waves. Progressive activists shared it with captions like, "Watch how a single sentence cuts deeper than 1,000 speeches." This is how you hold power accountable. No shouting, just truth. And then within hours, it wasn't activists or pundits driving the story. It was ordinary people. Teachers, truck drivers, grandmothers, teenagers. They weren't sharing it because it was shocking. They were sharing it because it was familiar. Because, in Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of privilege, they recognized themselves, and all the times they had stayed silent, smiled tightly, swallowed it down. Now they didn't have to. Now someone had said it, and said it in a place where the whole country had to listen. By sunset, the clip had crossed 1 million views. By midnight, 10 million. By dawn, it had exploded past 20 million and counting. Everywhere, people leaned closer to their screens. Not to be outraged. Not even to be inspired. But because for the first time in a long time, they were seeing something real. Not a viral stunt. Not a political grandstanding. Not another screaming match designed to rack up outrage clicks. Just one woman standing still, armed with nothing but memory data and the gravity of history refusing to blink. And America, a country addicted to distraction, numb by noise, couldn't look away. In a small town in Missouri, a long-haul trucker sat parked at a gas station diner, his coffee cooling beside him, as he rewatched the clip for the third time. He muttered under his breath, almost ashamed to hear his own voice say it, "I'm white." and I never thought about it before. In a high school classroom in Tulsa, a history teacher scrapped her lesson plan, entirely projected the video onto the wall, and told her students, "I want you to watch this not as students, but as citizens." And when the clip ended, a 15-year-old boy in the back, thin and soft-spoken, raised his hand and asked, "If they call her you people, what do they call us?" No one answered. Because the question didn't need an answer. It was the answer. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Nancy Mace went silent. No tweets, no interviews, no Fox News segments. Her office released a generic statement about focusing on legislative priorities. Her aides shuffled her into cars with tinted windows. When reporters shouted questions at her, "Do you regret saying it? Do you stand by your words?" she stared straight ahead as if pretending not to hear. But silence speaks. And this silence spoke volumes. Inside the Capitol, her colleagues, even some who agreed with her politics, kept their distance. They didn't want to catch the fallout. Because Nancy Mace wasn't just trending. She was radioactive. And Jasmine Crockett. She didn't gloat. She didn't dance for cameras. She posted one thing. A single black and white photo. Her standing in the center of the hearing room, shoulders, square hands, folded eyes, locked on the camera like she was staring down history itself. No caption. No hashtags. No call to action. Just the image. And somehow that silence was louder than 1,000 speeches. The photo went viral too. Some called it the stare that froze Congress. Others dubbed it the moment America had to look at itself. On Reddit, someone simply wrote, "She didn't shout. She didn't weep. She didn't beg. She didn't run. She stood. And that was enough." And maybe that was the most radical thing Jasmine Crockett had done. She didn't try to make injustice palatable. She didn't package it for mass consumption. She didn't soften the blow so it could be ignored. She held up a mirror and dared the country to look. Not all of it did, of course. Some recoiled. Right-wing commentators scrambled to shift the narrative, critical race theory propaganda. Race hustling at its finest. Another Democrat dividing America. One conservative senator snarled on radio, "This isn't healing, it's shame politics." But the more they screamed, the clearer it became. They weren't mad because Jasmine Crockett had lied. They were mad because she hadn't. They were mad because she made them feel something they didn't want to feel. Guilt. Fear. Recognition. Because if you people still meant something today, still separated some Americans from others, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in courtrooms, then maybe the lie they had been telling themselves for generations, that racism was over, that the playing field was level, that privilege was just a liberal myth, wasn't a lie they could hide behind anymore. Not after this. Not after 20 million Americans had seen it with their own eyes. The ripple effects were just beginning. Teachers printed out transcripts of Jasmine's words for classroom discussions. Community organizers used the clip to open hard conversations in church basements and union halls. Parents showed it to their kids over dinner. Elders whispered about it in barbershops and laundromats, places where truth had always lived, even when no one wanted to hear it. In Georgia, a retired firefighter watched the clip twice, then called his grown son and said, "Watch this. You need to see it. We all do." In Idaho, a school counselor cried quietly at her desk. Not because Jasmine Crockett had revealed something new, but because she had confirmed what so many already knew and carried in silence. Jasmine didn't just spark outrage. She sparked memory. She sparked confrontation. She sparked movement. Not the kind that can be measured in hashtags or protest signs, the deeper kind. The kind that lodges inside a country's bones and refuses to let it sleep comfortably ever again. And through it all, Jasmine remained silent. No media tour. No victory lap. No fundraising emails declaring herself a hero. Just that one image. Just that one moment. And a nation struggling to decide what to do with the truth staring it dead in the face. But truth doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for poll numbers or bipartisan consensus. It moves slow at first, almost imperceptible, until suddenly it's everywhere. And that's exactly what started to happen. At first, it was small, almost invisible. A history teacher in Des Moines added a new module to her syllabus titled Uncomfortable Truths: What History Leaves Out. A librarian in rural Nebraska slipped Crockett's speech transcript between the pages of banned books. A church in Birmingham, Alabama, hosted a Sunday forum, You People in the Walls We Still Haven't Torn Down. Not protests, not riots. Conversations. And in America, sometimes conversations are the most revolutionary act of all. In town halls and barbershops and classrooms and backyards, people started asking the questions they had been trained not to ask. Why does the same mistake destroy one life, but forgive another? Who really gets second chances? If privilege isn't about money, what is it about? The words Jasmine Crockett spoke, quiet, surgical, devastating, echoed far beyond the marble columns of Congress. They echoed inside homes where parents sat across kitchen tables, trying to explain to their children why one boy with a toy gun ends up handcuffed while another walks free with a real one. They echoed inside union halls, where workers realized that inequity wasn't just a headline, it was baked into the contracts, the promotions, the opportunities they thought were earned on merit alone. They echoed inside police precincts, where a few officers, uncomfortably shifting in their chairs, began rewatching footage of past arrests through new eyes. The country hadn't erupted. It had begun to ache. An ache old as the soil itself, buried for generations, now rising again like smoke from a long smothered fire. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett stayed silent. No interviews, no op-eds, no cable news debates. Just that black and white photo still pinned to the top of her social media page, still burning its quiet brand into the conscience of anyone who dared to look at it long enough. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable began to happen. Not in Washington, not on CNN panels or in think tank white papers, but in living rooms, in lunchrooms, in late-night text threads between friends who hadn't spoken about race since college or maybe ever. People started to say it out loud. I never saw it before. I thought it was just politics. Maybe. Maybe it's real. Not everyone, of course. There were still the deniers, still the loudmouths who claimed Jasmine had played the race card, that she was dividing the country, that she was manufacturing outrage. But their voices, so often amplified by outrage, algorithms suddenly felt smaller, shriller, more desperate. Because when truth takes root, denial begins to sound like madness. And Jasmine Crockett hadn't shouted her truth. She had placed it, like a stone in a river, unmoving, unyielding, forcing the current to change around her. Meanwhile, Nancy Mace's silence stretched on. She dodged press conferences. She canceled public appearances. Her allies grew restless. Inside closed-door meetings, Republican strategists whispered about the Crockett problem. Not because Jasmine was radical, not because she was loud, but because she had exposed something they had worked so hard to bury, that the story they had sold about equality, achieved about colorblind success, was a story built on sand. And once you see the cracks, you can't unsee them. A young congressional aide, anonymous and terrified of losing her job, leaked to a journalist. They're panicking because it wasn't a gaffe. It was a glimpse. And Crockett held up the mirror long enough that now everybody saw it. Some donors began pulling their money quietly from candidates who defended Mace too loudly. Polling shifted slightly, but unmistakably, especially among young voters. For the first time in decades, privilege wasn't a dirty word, it was a reality people were willing to name, because Crockett had done something rare. She had made the truth undeniable, not by screaming it, but by embodying it, by standing still while the walls shook around her. In Detroit, a mother of 3 working 2 jobs taped Crockett's quote to her fridge, "Privilege is the power to survive your mistakes." In Pennsylvania, a veteran emailed his old Army buddies, "We fought for a country we thought was fair. Maybe it's time we fight to make it so." In Austin, a high school senior submitted her college admissions essay titled, "What You People Taught Me About My People." The movement wasn't loud. It wasn't trending every day. It was quieter than that. Stronger, more dangerous. Because outrage burns fast. But recognition, real recognition, smolders. It spreads in whispers, in uncomfortable glances, in quiet nods that say, "Yeah, I see it now too." And no one could stop it. Not media spin. Not political counterattacks. Not angry think pieces or late night jokes. Because Crockett hadn't just delivered a speech. She had issued a dare. See it. Name it. And then decide who you want to be. Some chose anger. Some chose retreat. But more, far more than anyone expected, chose honesty. Hard, raw, imperfect honesty. And for a country built on myths stitched together by the comfort of forgetting, that choice was revolutionary. One town in Ohio held a public forum titled simply, "What do we do with the mirror?" A pastor in Louisiana rewrote his Easter sermon to say, "Resurrection isn't just for bodies, it's for consciences too." A retired teacher in Wisconsin sent Jasmine Crockett a handwritten letter that ended with, "For the first time in my life, I understand that seeing privilege isn't about guilt. It's about courage." And in coffee shops and carpool lines, in long walks between friends, the questions kept coming. What kind of country are we, if we only love justice when it costs us nothing? What kind of people are we, if we demand forgiveness only for ourselves? The old story was breaking apart. And in its place, something new, fragile, unsteady, but real, was trying to be born. Not because of a bill passed, not because of a law signed, but because one woman stood still in the center of a crumbling room and made America see itself, even if only for a moment, even if the mirror cracked under the weight. The reckoning hadn't ended. It had only just begun, but reckonings don't live forever in viral clips or trending hashtags. They either fade, swallowed by the next scandal, the next distraction, or they root themselves in something deeper, something stubborn, something alive. Jasmine Crockett understood that, which is why she didn't ride the wave of fame. She didn't sign a book deal. She didn't launch a national tour. She went home. Back to Dallas. Back to the community that had sent her into those marble halls in the first place, not to become a symbol, but to become a shield. And they were waiting for her. When Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the stage of a packed community center 3 weeks after the hearing, there were no TV crews, no polished pundits, no flashing lights, just folding chairs, homemade signs, and 1,000 beating hearts, black, white, Latino, Asian, young, old, tired, hopeful. The walls were sweating under the Texas heat. The air buzzed not with spectacle, but with something more potent expectation. Not for a show, for a conversation. She walked to the center of the stage, slowly, hands at her sides, her heels clicking softly against the scuffed wooden floor. No entourage, no teleprompter. Just her and the weight she carried. The room rose to its feet, not in explosive applause, but in a slow, reverent, standing silence. The kind of silence that says, "We saw what you did, and we are ready to do our part too." Jasmine took the mic. Both hands. Steady. She didn't smile for effect. She didn't wave like a politician. She just breathed. Once. Twice. And then she spoke. "I didn't come here tonight to go viral." She began, her voice low and certain. "I didn't come here to collect likes or retweets or speaking fees. I came here because reckoning without repair is just theater, and we are not here for theater anymore." The room leaned in, not metaphorically, but physically. Chairs creaked. Children stopped fidgeting. Phones were forgotten in pockets. Because they knew she meant it. And more importantly, because deep down, they knew she meant them. This wasn't just her fight. It never had been. "That hearing didn't change the world," she said. "It cracked it open. Now the question is, what are we willing to build in the space left behind?" A man in the third row, a retired postal worker with hands thick from decades of lifting and carrying, wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. Not because Jasmine was emotional, but because he was. Because she wasn't giving them slogans. She was giving them permission. Permission to hurt. Permission to hope. Permission to demand better. They called it a moment, she continued. But a moment isn't enough. Moments fade. Movements don't. In the back of the room, an elderly woman clutched a laminated copy of Jasmine's, quote, the one about privilege and survival, against her chest like a hymn. Jasmine saw her. She saw all of them. The ones who had been told they were too loud, too angry, too impatient. The ones who had been told to wait, to be polite, to be patient, while history stepped over their bodies like stones. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about patience. It was about planting. Planting something too deep for storms to uproot. I stood still in that room, Jasmine said, her voice rising slightly now, because I wanted them to understand we are not asking for permission anymore. We are not asking to be seen as human. We are telling them we already are. Applause began hesitant at first, like testing the strength of newly healed wings, then rolling louder, richer, until it filled every dusty corner of that old community center. But Jasmine raised one hand not to hush them, but to call them higher. This is not about me, she said. It never was. It's about every student who's been tracked into lower classes because someone assumed less. It's about every job applicant whose resume was thrown out because of a name. It's about every mother who had to have the talk with her child about how to survive a traffic stop. It's about every dream deferred, every hope dismissed, every life diminished because someone somewhere looked at a face and decided it didn't belong. She paused, letting the words find their mark, not hammering them in, just offering them like seeds. And they were planting themselves row by row, heart by heart. They will tell you that acknowledging privilege is divisive, she said. They will tell you that naming injustice is dangerous. They will tell you that history should stay buried so we can pretend the ground was always even. But we are not burying anything anymore. We are planting truth, and truth grows. The applause now wasn't just loud, it was defiant. It was joyful. It was furious. Because they knew truth does grow. Even through concrete. Even through denial. Even through centuries of silence. Jasmine smiled then. Not a politician's smile. A soldier's smile. A builder's smile. I don't need them to approve, she said. I need us to remember we were never waiting for permission. We were waiting for each other. She stepped back from the mic, not because she had run out of things to say, but because she had said enough for now. The rest would not be decided in speeches or hearings. It would be decided in actions, in classrooms, in hiring committees, in police stations, in ballots, in boardrooms, in conversations whispered between generations, because the mirror had been held up, because the cracks had been seen, because the reckoning had not ended, it had been handed over. To them, to all of us. And the real question wasn't whether America had seen itself clearly for the first time in a long time. The real question was whether America would be brave enough to stay looking. The room stood, not out of obligation, not out of tradition, out of something harder to name and harder to kill. Hope, anger, love, resolve. Whatever it was, it didn't need to be shouted to be felt. It just needed to be lived. And Jasmine Crockett, standing barefoot now on the scuffed stage, her heels abandoned behind her, like old armor, knew she hadn't gone viral. She hadn't started a trend. She had planted a revolution, small, stubborn, and unstoppable. And the country, ready or not, would have to decide, would it turn away again, or would it finally dare to grow?